South Dixie virtual group, and this is a South Dixie group, and we sprung from this group, and it's good to be here. So I'm in my 44th year of sobriety, and I guess next month is my birthday month, and that'll be the deal there. And so if I make it, it's good to be here, and I'm not the same guy that I came in. I hit up I think my spiritual bottom, which to me is the real bottom, on December 25th, Christmas morning at 3 o'clock in the morning, 1980. And I thought I was 31 years old. I thought my life was over. I had destroyed everything in my life worthwhile. I was a talented guy. I was, by my own opinion, an intelligent guy. I earned a lot of degrees and things like that. And my life had been destroyed. And it was 3 a.m. in the morning. I hurt a lot of people. I heard a good woman who was my wife, who was a decent gal, didn't do anything wrong except marry me. I heard a son who I abandoned. So I go out there and be the playboy or whatever the heck I thought I was doing. And I, quite frankly, do believe, looking back on that life, that old life, that I really didn't give a crap about anybody except myself. I used to think, without any question, that I was just a good guy. I figured I was a good guy, and I was not a good guy. There was no question. The way I look at myself back then, I was just not a good guy. I'm afraid I've reached the point in my life I can't even consider myself a sick guy. Listen, I think it's great that Alcoholics Anonymous allows us to believe, and I do believe, that we suffer from a dis-ease, but called alcoholism. But to be honest with you, I think it's possible to suffer from the disease of alcoholism and to still be one hell of a selfish son of a bitch. We're made the both two go together. I just don't excuse myself anymore that easily because, and the reason I don't excuse myself that easily is because I got sober 1 month later and I was still an asshole. Although I thought of myself as a good guy. So listen, I don't need to be drinking to hurt people. I don't need to be drinking or not in AA to just think about myself and worry about myself and be totally consumed by myself. So every defect of the character I had before I came into Alcoholics Anonymous, this absolute focus on me, being concerned about me, feeling like I was a victim, tending to resent people, being jealous, you name every bad trait in the book that I had before I came to AA, I had and I hung on to for many years after coming into AA and picking up a white chip. I mean, that is the absolute truth. While in a sense, even through all the steps and everything, my thinking I'm basically a good boy. That's what my grandmother used to tell me. She said, Russell, you're basically a good boy, which I don't know what that means. I think it means underneath all the bullshit, when we scrape it all away, somewhere down there's maybe a constitutional way of, feeling honest about yourself. Or, maybe there's some redeeming social factor in your life. But it's easy to say, well, I was this way because I drank. But the bottom line is I was a bad actor and I hurt people. And many times listen, why would you have to do amends all the time? For the first 10, 15 years, and maybe even after that, if you weren't selfish, hey, great. You go in the booze for a lot of things, but what do you do after you stop drinking the booze and you're sponsoring people and you're speaking at meetings and you're doing all the steps? And you're still a jerk. And you're still doing things to hurt other people. And you're still thinking about yourself. But that's something, quite frankly, if you're an alcoholic, at least I'm just talking about myself. I don't know about anybody else. I actually do know about a lot of people because I've sponsored a lot of people. And over the last 44 years, I've watched a lot of people. But just talking about myself, there's a lot of lessons you got to learn over a period of a long period of time. You really need to see this disease play out over 10, 20, 30, 40 years, half a century. I can tell you this. There's a big difference between looking at yourself and other people and looking at the world with 5 years recovery and with 25 or 30 or 40 years recovery. You see a lot more warts and defects as you grow older and you go through all the stuff that we go through in this world. And so the guy who's talking to you here today, the guy was 75 years old. And the guy who is in his 44th year of sobriety is not the same guy that picked up a white chip, 44 years ago. And I'm not even the same guy I was like 6 months ago. So my story is different. I have a different story. It's not the same story that I had a while. It's really my story now. Is not a drunkalog, it's more of a faithfulog. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. The way I see things, this is the way I see things after all these years, is I see two different big books. I see a big book which talks about not drinking one day at a time, no matter what, and giving you the tools to be able to do that, which is a wonderful book. I read that book for many years. I followed that book for many years. I promoted that book for many years. I went to conventions and spoken about that book for many years. I can still quote that book. And quite frankly, given a certain person in AA, if I was talking to him, I would be talking about not drinking one day at a time. And, many people come in here and that's what they need to come in here on that book, on the book that says, no matter what, don't drink. I need to hear the guys that say you could screw up your entire life, Russell. But if you don't have a drink that day, you're a winner. You're victorious. I need to hear that because that's how I came in on that deal. And it is true that in December 25th, 1980, at 3 o'clock in the morning, I got on my knees and I gave my life to Jesus Christ. That is true. That's a true statement. There's in Dr. Bob and the Good Old Timers, there's an interesting story about how Bob Smith sponsored or 12-stepped Clarence the Brewmaster, who started the first AA meeting in Cleveland, which had a very high rate of success. And the way the story goes, to sort of wrap it up quickly, is Bob walked in on Clarence, and Clarence was only 35 years old. I came in at 31. And Clarence was 135 pounds. I've never seen 135 pounds. I don't think I was born. I think I was bigger than that when I was born. But he was 135 pounds, and he went there because Clarence's wife begged Bill to go see him, and he walked in, and he was sitting in a hospital bed. And to make us really the story a little bit shorter, although it's pretty much a short story, Bob Smith said to Clarence, he said, "What do you think about all this?" And Clarence says, "I don't know." And then Bob Smith, the first thing he said to him is, "Do you believe in God?" First thing Bob Smith said to him was, "Do you believe in God?" Now, you can listen to all the voices in AA that tell you don't talk to newcomers about the God thing, and you're telling newcomers all that crap. But I'm just telling you what the facts are. It's in the book, in our conference-approved book, if you're sold out on the conference. And said, "Do you believe in God?" And Clarence said, "What does that have to do with it?" Which is probably something you would expect. And Bob Smith said, "Everything." I have heard people in AA say that if they had talked to me about God when I came in here, I wouldn't be here. Alcoholics say a lot of stupid shit. And I'll tell you, we're so braggadocious, man. I don't give a crap what other people think about. We like to brag. We like to arrogantly stand up and act like, we wouldn't be here. I wonder how many people say crap like that. I wouldn't be here if they talked to me about God. Let me tell you something. I got news for you. If you came into Alcoholics Anonymous, they were talking about God. Somebody was talking about God, and you didn't run out the door. Or maybe you did, or maybe you drank again, okay? But we like to say things like that just to prove like we're men or we're better than everybody or that we have courage, whatever it is. But I can tell you this. They were talking about God. I wasn't running anywhere because I had no place to go. I hit bottom. And I kind of think that if you're going to run out the door because people are talking about God, there's a lot of other things they're going to tell you to do in here that would be a good excuse to go out and drink. Like, don't hang around with slippery people, slippery play. There's a lot of things we're told to do, like go to a meeting every day, get a sponsor. And quite frankly, the people that don't want to do that, the people who feel that way, if they had told me something like that or ordered me to do something, I would have left. Most of them do leave. Most of them do drink eventually. Maybe after a month, maybe after 6 months, and maybe after 3 or 4 years. But Bob Smith turned to Clarence and he said, God means everything. And he said, do you believe in God? And he says, Clarence said, this is an alcoholic. This is what an alcoholic might say. I said, well, I guess I do. And Bob said, guess nothing. You either do or you don't. I've been sponsoring people for a long time, and I guess I've changed the manner in which I sponsor people and the way I talk to people and the way I look at people and, that kind of thing over a period of time. I was on AA Relay for 8 years in Miami. If you called up AA any Friday night between the hours of 9 o'clock at night and 9 o'clock the next morning, Saturday morning, you called up, you got me, which is why probably for 8 years nobody got sober. But I've heard enough stories and enough people calling up in the middle of the night, enough people talking to me, and enough sleepless nights listening to people who weren't interested in getting sober anyway. They were just interested in not drinking alone. I had a lot of calls from people that'll talk to you for 3 hours and say, could you excuse me for a second? And then you hear the ice going into the glass and everything like that. They're just lonely. Where finally, after you sponsor enough people and you listen to enough of that stuff, you pretty much know when somebody's ready to stop drinking, when somebody's just sort of using you because they're lonely. You're pretty used to that deal. There's a reason why they have this organization called the Al-Anon. There's a reason why when you see an alcoholic, they've already been deserted by their mother, father, and everybody that really loves them. And now they're looking for more victims. They're looking to manipulate more victims and make them feel guilty. But anyway, apparently Bob understood that. And he said, guess nothing. You either do, you don't. He pinned the guy down. And Clarence said, well, I do. He says, nah, good. Now we're getting somewhere. And he said, okay, get out of your bed, the hospital bed. We're going to pray. And I'm not making this stuff up. This is the way they did it back in 1935, 36, 37, 38, 39. And so Clarence said, well, I don't know how to pray. And Bob Smith, that didn't stop me. He says, well, you just follow along with what I have to say, and then that'll be okay. And he got down on his knees and he said he turned his life over to God. And then he got up and he had this great statement that Clarence said in Dr. Bob and the Good Old Timers. He said, I did what I was ordered to do. There were no suggestions. I did what I was ordered to do. There were no suggestions. I have like a little imaginary test that I have for alcoholics to see whether they're serious or whether they're going to stop drinking, whether I really want to sponsor them or what their deal is. They come to me and they'll ask me to sponsor them and I'll say, sure, I don't turn anybody down. Unless there's a good reason for it. And they'll say, this is what I want you to do. And I'll tell them to do something. And they'll either do it or not do it. It's real simple. It won't be something difficult. It'll be something easy, And I don't fire people, but it just tells me what's going on, you know. It just tells me because at some point in time, especially when you're dealing with childish alcoholics, you got to be able to look at them in the eye and say, look, you don't really want to stay sober. You just want attention. You need to grow up. So in any event, so I guess the one thing that I did right after I got on my knees on December 25th, I did what I was ordered to do. And I guess that's the one thing I had going to me. I did what I was ordered to do. They told me to get a sponsor. I got a sponsor. I didn't want to get a sponsor. Well, actually, I did sort of want to get a sponsor. I just didn't want to have to ask him. I didn't want to ask him. I didn't want to, it's almost like telling somebody you need help. I didn't want to say I needed help. I didn't want to ask them. But I had to overcome that because I asked somebody, how do you get a sponsor? And they said, you got to ask them. And I said, how do you ask him? He says, you go up to somebody that you want what they have, and you say, will you be my sponsor? This is really difficult stuff, And I went up to a guy named Bob Sullivan. I said, will you be my sponsor? And he said, sure, I just want you to do three things. Three things. He was a three-thing guy, And this is what he said. I want you to get a book called The 24-Hour Book. I want you to read it every day. And if you know anything about the 24-Hour Book, it's every day there's scripture from the Bible mixed with the big book. And there's a thought for the day, and there's a meditation or a prayer for the day. He said, I want you to read that every day and get on your knees and ask God's help to stay sober. That's what I want you to do. I said, okay. And then he said, I want you to join a group, a home group. And I remember asking him, well, what group do you belong to? He says, you wouldn't like my group. So, I don't want you in my group, or something like that. Well, that's the way I took. I ended up joining his group. He says, I want you to join a home group. And then he asked me to do he says, and if you're going to drink, I want you to call me before you drink. I don't want to don't call me after you drink. I don't really want to speak to you. You call me before you drink. And I did everything he told me to do, but there's a story behind everything. I got a 10-minute story won't tell you about as to how a 10 or 15-minute story as to how I got a home group. Because if you're an alcoholic, the simplest instruction takes a 10 to 20-minute story. And the 10 to 20-minute story takes place over 3 days. It's not that these things are different. When somebody says, how do you get a sponsor? You just ask them. It's not like you go up and ask somebody. You got to prepare yourself, get ready, try to figure that. There's a lot of thought that goes into a lot of these things. We're great thinkers. You got to analyze this. You got to make the right choice. And he told me to get the 24-hour book. I did pretty quickly. I got myself a book and I got down on the knees. I did that thing. But then that last thing, well, I did do that. I got into a fight with my wife. You know how she is. How they are. She disagreed with me on something. And I was I decided with my best thinking, and I decided this sober, that what I would do is I would punish her by drinking. I would show her, I'd teach her a lesson. I would drink at her. But then I remembered what my sponsor said, to always call them before you drink. And I had just left the meeting, and I picked up the phone, and I called them up, and there was a busy signal. And I waited 30 seconds, 40 seconds, whatever it is. You know what I mean? It's like 5 hours, And I called them up again. And there was a busy signal. And then I waited another minute or so, 2 minutes, and I called them up again. And there was another busy signal. And then I called them up a fourth time. And it rang, and it rang, and it rang, and nobody answered. And I saw him the next day, and I said, you told me if I was ever going to drink to call you. And I said, I called you up, and I told him the story. I said, and there was a busy signal. I called you up again. There was a busy signal. And I called you up again. There was a busy signal. I called you up, and it rang, and it rang, and it rang, and you didn't pick up. And he said, well, did you drink? I said, no, I didn't drink. He said, well, you see, it works. You got to get yourself crazy guys like that, That's the kind of people you got to get yourself. These sponsors that are sarcastic. So I got myself a sponsor, and I did what I was told to do, and I did a lot of service. But I can tell you this, and this is what I believe. Anytime I got involved in service, almost every time I got involved in service, whatever the service was based upon some sponsor telling me, you need to do this. I never sort of got the bright idea. Oh, I might say things like, I'll read the fifth chapter. I'll read the fifth chapter, or I'll hand out the chips or something. But I mean, the major, being secretary of the group or intergroup representative or making coffee for the group, the major stuff that actually required that you take some time or effort, sponsoring people. I never volunteered for that kind of stuff, It was always my sponsor saying to me, intergroup banquet, he says, you ought to do this thing. And I ended up somehow doing it. Every sort of move I made that had anything to do that was good for me was never because of something. I shouldn't say was never. That's a big, long thing. I probably made a couple of right moves on my own. But almost everything I did that required growth or changed my life was because somebody suggested you ought to do it. And even though they might have suggested, I took every suggestion as you need to do this thing. I mean, that statement, that's why I love that statement. I did what I was ordered to do. There were no suggestions. To me, they were more than suggestions. And I came into AA and I joined the Fellowship of the Problem, the Fellowship of how not to drink one day at a time, the Fellowship on how to get rid of the resentments, the Fellowship on how not to be depressed, the Fellowship of how to solve all the problems I had in my life. And I was the original victim, the original thumb-sucking crybaby. But I was doing the program. And if you're doing the program, you can still be deep inside the guy who's worried about what people think about you, worried about money, worried about all sorts of things with all sorts of issues, and somehow come across as like you have your shit together. You can even fool yourself into thinking you have your crap together. They have this great line in the book. There will come a time in every alcoholic's life will have no defense against the first drink. His defense has to come from God. And sometimes you have to get to that point after 5 or 10 or 15 years before you understand that that is the truth. There will come a time in every alcoholic's life where you'll have no defense against the first drink. The defense has to come from God. And if you haven't come to that point yet, it's because you haven't come to that point yet. But one day you may come to that point. They have this line in the big book. They say, says here and there, a former drinker says, he says, I feel better, look better, having a better time. He says, we laugh at such problems. We know he'll soon try the old game again because he's not happy with his sobriety. He's not happy with his sobriety. Soon he'll try the old game again. He will know loneliness as few do. He'll be at the jumping off place. And I got to that place. I got to that place after working the Fellowship of the Problem, after working the Don't Drink and Go to Meetings. Ain't nothing wrong. I'm not going to put it down. I don't know. All I know is that I worked that Don't Drink and Go to Meetings thing. Don't drink even if your ass falls off. There ain't no problem so big that a drink can't make it worse. I worked the not drinking program one day at a time. And it worked for me. I didn't drink one day at a time. And I might have even gotten a little bit better, a little bit nicer little bit less selfish, one day at a time. But there reached a point in my life with all the service and all the inventories and all the steps. See, I worship the steps. I thought I worshiped the big book, but the big book I worshiped was, there's two. I've discovered for my own purposes, there's two big books. There's a big book you read to stay physically sober, and there's a big book you read to find God and to worship God. Sometimes, you'll see the God big book. You'll see parts of the big book where it says, therefore we wrote a book which is spiritual. And therefore, of course, we have to talk about God. It says, because the main purpose of the book, is help you to get a relationship with a power greater than ourselves, which will solve your problem. Not only will solve your life's problem. Not only solve the drinking problem, but solve all your problems. That's the main purpose. Therefore, we wrote a book where we're going to talk, of course, about God. And it says here, for alcoholics and agnostics, people who aren't sure. It's like what was it Bob Smith said to the guy? He said, guess nothing. Guess nothing. You either believe or you don't believe. And he said, well, I believe. And he says, good, get down on your knees. It was guess nothing. God either is or he isn't. What is your decision going to be? I go to AA meetings where you can sit there for an hour and nobody mentions God. They'll mention about all the problems. I'll go to AA meetings where atheists will stand up and say, well, I'm an atheist. I don't believe in God. It's perfectly acceptable. Nobody will go up to them and say, don't say stuff like that. Even so, they say in the big book, this sort of thinking has to be abandoned. But if you sit up there and you talk about God too much, people are looking at their watch, they turn around, they're saying, what is this all about? Perfectly permissible not to believe in God in AA. There are people in AA that are working the godless program, even though they think they're working the God program, because they say the strength prayer. And there are people in AA that are serious believers. And there's two different books. You could see lines in the big books where they talk about God, and it says, half measures avail you nothing. We stood at the turning point. There is one who has all power. That one is God. May you find him now. The main purpose of sharing an A room, what does it say we're supposed to do? We're supposed to talk about how we discovered and how did we acquire a relationship with God. That's the main purpose of AA. All men of faith have courage. They trust their God. We never apologize for God. Instead, we let him demonstrate through our testimony what he has done for us. And once we begin to outgrow fear, all about God. There are people that look at that. I'm one of those people that look at that. And what I see a book that's about utterly abandoning yourself to God. I see a book that says, burn the idea, and to every alcoholic's line that he can be well, no what matter anything, as long as he trusts in God and clean house. I see a book that says, well, our real reliance must be on God. He will show us even how to create the fellowship we crave, and we will then ultimately, if we see what our relationship with him is right, be able to hang out with the fellowship of the Spirit, a different fellowship. I see God all over the big book, but that's the God big book. There's another big book where you can read it and it talks about not drinking, where you don't need God. Apparently, a lot of people say you can see it. You don't need to do the God thing. No thanks. They get upset when you talk about God. People walk out of the room. I didn't come here for this crap and everything like that. Back in the old days, 1935, 1939, 1940, you couldn't really get away with that because back between 1935, when AA started in 1940, if you wanted to go to an AA meeting, you had to get down on your knees in front of the entire group and accept God into your life. Most people don't know that. You read Dr. Bob, the good old timers, most people like to focus on Appendix 2, written when Bill Wilson was 3.5 years sober. Appendix 2, which they seem to look at Appendix 2 as like the loophole saying you could be an atheist, there's no problem. Just cancel out anything I say about God. That's the way they read Appendix 2. But here's the problem that I've discovered in my own life, and I've seen in a lot of other people's lives. And maybe you don't really see this thing until you've got a few. I'm not pulling rank or anything. I'm not bragging. I just didn't. The way you become an old timer is don't drink and don't die. And I just haven't drank for almost 44 years. And what you notice when you get on the back end of 30, 40 years is you look around the neighborhood, and what you see a lot of people on the birthday board with 1 year, 5 years, 13 years, 7 years, and everything like that. And nobody's got 40 years. Nobody's got 35 years. You see all of a sudden a drop off after 20 years, like nobody's around, but they all die. You know what I mean? And you see a lot of people. You hear a lot of people come to rooms and say, well, I had 22 years and then I drank. I had 15 years and then I drank. I had 5 years and then I drank. And what you start realizing is you can play the game. You can be the dilettante, the amateur, and play the game for a certain amount of time and get away with not drinking, going to meetings, having fun with the fellowship, going to the parties, you know what I mean? Maybe doing once over lightly with the steps and stuff like that. Maybe sponsoring a few people here or there. You can play the game and use the tools and worship the tools of Alcoholics Anonymous without actually having to get the results, what the tools are supposed to give you, and that is making God the central fact to your life. There's this part of the big book that tells us that we can be rocketed into the fourth dimension of existence, become reborn. We can be rocketed in the fourth dimension of existence, experiencing much of heaven and knowing peace. And the only thing we have to do is get involved with the great fact. Doesn't say anything about the steps. It says all you have to do is have the great fact. And you know what it says the great fact is? It says the great fact is this and nothing less. One, God's got to be the central fact of your life. The only thing you think about, the most important thing in your life. And number two, you must be convinced. None of this guest stuff. Be convinced that he lives in your heart and mind in a way which is indeed miraculous, helping you to do those things that you could never do by yourself. Now, let me tell you something. And this is just my opinion. People who have reached that point, who've been rocked in the fourth dimension of existence, who live a life of peace, who have gained the promise where they lose fear of people and people's opinions and economic insecurity, people who have embraced the great fact, don't tell other people, don't worry about the God thing. They don't tell other people, don't worry about the God thing. They don't get mad at people that talk about God. People that get mad at people that don't talk about God don't really have a relationship with God. They just don't. They may think they do, but what they do is they're really playing God. They're playing the game. They're holding the hands. They're doing that. And they don't seem to last that long. They get to a point. And for me, I didn't last that long. I lasted for about 10 years doing that stuff. And then I started falling apart emotionally. I had an emotional bottom at 10 years. And I ran into a guy and I mentioned to him what was going on with me, and all of a sudden I was doing it. I was doing it all. I know you hear people say, well, it's because they stopped going to meetings. I was going to a lot of meetings. As a matter of fact, I was doubling up on my meetings because I figured, well, maybe I'm not going to enough meetings, so I'll go to 4 meetings a day. 3 meetings. I've been going to 3 meetings a day for years. I sponsored people. I did everything. It wasn't helping. It wasn't helping. Imagine getting to a point in your life where, let me see, how old was it? Let me tell you, I came in when I was 31. I must have been about 40 years old, 41 years old, 10 years sobriety, married 10 years, a few kids, and still incredibly worried about economic insecurity, still suffering from anxiety, still worried about what other people were thinking about me, would think about me, still not happy. I was not happy with my sobriety. Remember, we're not happy with our sobriety. They'll be at the jumping. I was at the jumping off place. And I happened to mention it to somebody who actually was not in AA, but he was a friend of mine, he was a religious guy. He says, you ought to go to Bible study. And I immediately told him that I'm in AA and I'm spiritual. I was a great example of being spiritual, not religious. And I thought the idea, because that's what the first big book, two big books. There's a big book with God, and there's a big book about alcohol, and then there's a big book where you seriously abandon yourself to God. And they're both in there. You can read it without looking at the God thing, and you can read the God thing. You read the God thing, that's a whole different book. And I was reading the big book without the God thing, where you could coast on God, or God was optional, or give God like lip service, or it was like a punchline. It's not like you're saying you're an atheist or anything. You just sort of like, he's not like a major, he's not like, it's not that money's important. It's just right up there with oxygen. There's like money, job, car, woman, prestige. Somewhere down there is God. And he's in the trunk of my car, and I take him out every time I go to a meeting or when things get really bad. And God's not the number one thing. And I did that for a good 10 years, and I suffered the consequences. And here's the problem. I didn't know what was wrong, because I was a good AA. By AA standards, I was like golden. Whatever. I was a banquet chairman, I was golden. And so when you're doing everything, you're doing the fourth step, you're doing the fifth step, you're doing amends, you're sponsoring people, how come I still felt crappy? And I couldn't figure out what was wrong. And I never even thought about the God thing, because, I would say the Serenity Prayer. I was still reading the 24-hour book, which is probably why I was still sober, not drinking. But then this guy tells me, you ought to go to Bible study. I didn't know what Bible study was. I never studied the Bible. And in a sense, I had gotten into the Bible without knowing it, because I was reading the 24-hour book and, that kind of thing. And I don't know what happened, but like a week later, I found myself in this Bible study. And you know what? I did what I was ordered to do. There were no suggestions. I reached a point in my life where I did what somebody told me to do. It wasn't, she says, you need to go to Bible study. And I found out in Bible study, what they did is they read the original big book, the good book. Dr. Bob said, if you want to know about AA, read the Bible. Books we found absolutely essential: 1 Corinthians 13, Sermon on the Mount, the book of James. And for the next 33 years, I went to that Bible study and several others. I've probably gone to thousands of Bible studies. Thousands and thousands, 30,000 meetings. And every time I went to a Bible study, every time I went to a meeting, every time I spoke, I just got a little gift. It's like I got a gift on January 25th, 1980. God saw fit to give me like a little gift. He gave me a little gift. Some guy came into my life, a preacher, and said, if you really want to change your life, get down on your knees and give your life to Jesus. And I did it. Jewish kid from New York, and I did. I did what I was ordered to do. There were no suggestions. And I didn't do it because he was a great speaker. And I didn't do it because I was smart. I did it because I was desperate. I did it because something had changed in me, so that I did something. And then every meeting after that, and every time I read the 24-hour book, and every time somebody came up to me in my life and, sort of pointed towards God or said anything towards God, I kept on getting these little gifts without even knowing about it. And then at 10 years sober, some guy who wasn't even in AA said, you need to go to Bible study. And I was given another gift. And after I was 3 years in that Bible study, a guy who was 60 years old came up to me. He had like 30 or 40 years sobriety at that time. His name was John Glenn, and he was a Baptist preacher, and he became my third sponsor. And I said, man, if I could only be like John Glenn. I'd be sitting in a restaurant eating. He'd say, what are you doing? I said, I'm eating, John. He says, we can't eat. He says, we have to give thanks. And in a crowded restaurant, he would bow his head, and I would sort of bow my head. But I was actually looking to each side to see who was looking at us, because I was worried about what people were thinking about me. I had two problems. Number one, I was worried what people thought about me, because I didn't think much about me. And I actually thought people were thinking about me. And he would say one of these long Baptist prayers that I would say, man, get to it already, and he'd be praying for everybody. And then he would stop praying, look up, and he says, now, Russell, the food will taste better because it's got that special ingredient. That was a gift. I got that gift. And he would give me all these gifts. When he was dying, he looked at me, he said, Russ, he says, my bags are packed. I'm ready to go. He wasn't even scared of God dying. He said, I was there. I watched these things. I watched people who believers who die. He says, my bags are packed. I'm ready to go. I'm fine. I'm doing fine. Don't worry about me. I was scared of everything I moved on the planet with a bunch of time and sobriety. I said, man, if I could only have, isn't that what they say in the big book? If you want what we have and you're willing to go to any length to get it, then you're ready. I had to find a different way. Since you want what we had, I had to keep on getting a different we. John Glenn became one of my we's. Believers became one of my. I wanted what they had. The drinking thing was resolved and has been resolved. It wasn't the drinking thing. It was the fear thing. It was the worry thing. It was the worry about what people think about me thing. It was this world is what the problem was. And I had to somehow change. And I wanted what John Glenn had. And that was the deal. And so, I never used, I was talking about it at a meeting today at 4:00, but you ever hear the word re-gift? Re-gift, it's, I actually looked it up in the dictionary today. What does it mean to re-gift? And what it means is that when you get a gift from someone and you pass it on, you rewrap it and then you pass it on. And that's all I've been doing for the last 20 years. 30 years is rewrapping the gifts I've been given and passing it on to other people. And it's funny, sometimes I get credit for it. People say, I heard Russell say this or Russell say that. And I just rewrapped a gift I got out of the Bible, rewrapped it I got out of Bible study, or rewrapped a gift I got out of John Glenn or somebody else. And it may sound a little bit different. And maybe I used a different language, different, idioms or something like that, or said it in a cute way. But they're all basically re-gifts of things that were given to me over the last 20, 30, 40 years. You know what I mean? I can hardly take credit for it. Sometimes if I remember, I actually give people the credit. I remember when I was 10 years sober and I was broke. Lack of money is a great motivator for alcoholics. So I was broke again at 10 years sober. I figured I'd be a multimillionaire. 10 years sober, and I was broke, a bunch of kids. I went up to Raymond Keefe and I said, when am I going to have financial security? There's that line in the book. Anybody ever seen that line that you'll lose fear of people and financial insecurity? And I think that it was 10 years. I wanted to be rich. I said, what am I going to have to do this for 10 years? What am I going to lose financial insecurity? He said, who told you you're going to lose financial? So I said, what do you mean? It says in the book. He says, it doesn't say that. I said, I just read it. Yeah. It says, read it to me. He says, we will lose fear of people and financial insecurity. He says, yeah, you see, Russ? He says, you'll lose the fear of finance. He says, you will always be broke. It just won't bother you. And I looked at him, and I don't even know how to say this, but somehow it made me feel better. I said, in one sense, I said, yeah, thanks a lot. I'm always going to be broke. He says, yeah, but it won't bother you. How many things are going on in my life right now at 75 years of age that would drive me crazy for months? Months. I'd be a thumb-sucking crybaby that don't even come up on my radar. I've had cancer 3 times. I got it now too, and I got to go through whatever they do with you, with the radiation shit and, the stuff. And it's to me, that doesn't bother me. I'm fine. It doesn't bother me. It really doesn't, but, I'll do whatever I have to do, whatever happens. My bags are packed anyway. So I'll go visit John. But the bottom line is that, it bothers me when I forget a password. You know what I mean? Man, that frosts my ass, You ever get on a thing and then all of a sudden it says wrong password? Oh man, now I got to look for a That cancer's not a big deal, but the password shit, that drives me crazy. You know what I mean? Look, I'm just telling you the truth. It's the little shit. You know what I mean? I left my phone down. Oh man, I got to go down and get my phone. The other stuff is not a big deal. And I don't know. You may think it's all bullshit, but I mean, the good thing about it is I don't have to write this down and remember because it's my life. I'm there when it's happening. And that all came about through His grace. That didn't come about. Let me tell you something. That loss of fear of other people and worrying about what other people think about you. That loss of not worrying and obsessing over the money, the property, prestige, and the romancing, that didn't come because they did a fourth step. That doesn't come from doing a fifth step. That doesn't come from the third. That comes from utterly abandoning yourself to God. Now, that's the result. That deal, that relationship with God and knowing that all things work for your good for those who love the Lord and are called to His purpose and regifting and doing things you're supposed to do, that may ultimately happen to you from doing the steps. That's what the steps are for. I mean, you may find this hard to believe. That third step, it says we turn our will, our life over to the care of God, has to do with turning your will and your life over to the care of God. That step that says we improve our conscious contact with God. We're consciously contacting God, that inspirational thinking thing, which becomes a working part of the mind that grows, and it grows. That's actually has to do with making God the central fact of your life. I mean, it's actually in the steps. But you ready for this? It apparently is possible to think you're doing all the steps, yet not get the benefit of it. Well, I had a preacher once said to me, one of my mentors said, Terry Miller said, Russ, what difference does it make if you don't make the difference? What difference does it make if you do all the steps perfectly and you have no relationship with God? I mean, what difference does it make if you miss the bullseye? If you don't get what you're supposed to get out of the steps because you're just not going to go there. You're going to just find, I don't need God. Why would I need God? I'm already spiritual. I'm keeping myself sober. It's because of all the work I'm doing. Well, I'll tell you what. When you get cancer, they tell you got to go through chemotherapy, or you got stage 4 cancer, you just tell your group about it and you sponsor and you can do a 4th step. I'm sure that'll solve the problem. Or you're lying there in bed and you can't use your bodily functions and you're peeing on yourself. Just do a 5th step. Just do a 3rd step. Do a 1st step. Do something just do the steps. Just sponsor somebody. That'll fix that up. That's the problem, everything. The problem is that suffering, going through pain, and being scared and having fear is absolutely necessary. Having the loss of control over ourselves and being powerless is absolutely necessary in order to get where we have to go. In Alcoholics Anonymous, and not only in Alcoholics Anonymous, in life. It seems to me that people that overcome extraordinary problems and great problems and focus on God seem to somehow grow a character and a strength that people that have it easy don't get. That's how many times I've seen people come to AA, they get the girlfriend back, they get the boyfriend back, they get the car back, they get the money back, and they're off to the races. Next thing you know, they're drinking and drugging. The guys that are always having problems, the bad things are happening, and all that stuff, they're like hugging on to AA. Many of them. I know I did. So it's the bewitching hour, so the time has come. So that's all I have to say, and we're going to close the meeting, but first I have to read some.